Be so kind as to begin by telling me your name and your position here at the library as loudly as you possibly can.
Okay, sure. I'm Natalie Borisovets, and I'm the head of public services here at the John Cotton Dana Library at Rutgers University in Newark.
How did you first become interested in the history and the legacy of Newark 67?
Um, well, I think you can't be in Newark without having some interest in Newark 67. I think that, in the last, 5 or 6 years, maybe, probably even before that, Newark has become a topic of great interest for historians and cultural historians, and we found that basically we couldn't keep anything relating to Newark, especially Newark 67, on the shelves. So we had to come up with something, and it was actually Rob Schneider's course. He did a course, a seminar that dealt with, he wanted to have people interview Newark alumni, and I put together something. He wanted them to be able to talk about Newark in terms of time and place when they were talking to people. So I put together sort of a basic guide having to do with that, and that just sort of started everything. And so we wanted to put things together that when somebody came in working on Newark, they could find information. So out of that grew the Newark Experience, which is the guide, and also the Newark collection. We've got about, I think at this point, 660 items that just relate specifically to Newark that are available for people to come in. And we've got people coming in from all over, actually, to use that collection. But, as the 40th anniversary got closer, there was more and more interest, and an awful lot of people working on it, and tried to put together as much as we could. And, small acorns, big trees.
Could you please tell me a little bit about what the Newark Experience has as a collection? What kinds of things did you choose to include? Which kinds of things are excluded now but you hope to include in the future as it grows?
You mean the guide itself? Sure. I guess we started with those areas where there was the most interest. So history, education, lots of people looking at Newark schools as both a model, I guess, in all directions. I mean, at one point, certainly in terms of urban education, it was among the saddest. But also there's been stuff that's been done that really is innovative and out there, and people are looking at using as a model for themselves in terms of urban education. So, history, education, those kinds of things where there is a lot of interest. But really there's, and basically what's there is, references to books, references to articles, references to papers, links to things on YouTube, whatever we can find that is seems to be significant. If somebody was interested in that aspect of Newark, we try to include. It's growing all the time. There's all kinds of sections. I think probably the section that is missing right now that there's an interest in is Newark business, the history of business in Newark, current, economic circumstances, that kind of stuff. That's going to get added, a section on famous people that came out of Newark, and Newark literary figures. These are all things that are kind of waiting in the wings until I can finish updating and moving the whole guide into the new format of what we have currently. And it's just going to keep growing because there's an awful lot of stuff that's not there yet. But it's pretty much anything and everything that can find, and every time I go looking for one particular thing, I usually find a couple of dozen of other things that go into a to be added at some point folder, because it's an incredible amount of stuff. Probably the latest thing that I have been adding are some interesting things that they're finding as part of the Newark Archive project. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the Rutgers Libraries, the Clem Price's Center for Ethnicity, and the Newark History Society have a memorandum of understanding to put together this pilot Newark Archives project, and the person who's heading it up, Gail Malgram, has an office here in the library, and basically what they're doing is they're going out and looking at collections of archival material that's out there, and basically documenting what kinds of collections exist. They're not really finding aids for these collections, but they're meant for researchers to find out where they could go. And there's like all kinds of, for example, one of the things they have done is they have gone to the municipal archives, and which have no, the municipal archives are doing wonderful things with, but they have no website. There's no way to actually know what's there right now, other than through the Newark Archives project. One of the things the municipal archives have done, for example, excuse me, is they've digitized over 8,000 Newark maps, which, again, they have no website. They're only available if you go to the reading room of the Newark Municipal Archives. Nobody knows about that. They have, for example, there was a evaluation and sort of at one point, I believe in the 80s, of they were, again, as they have so often done, look to restore the Kruger Scott Mansion. And the report of the group that did it, I think it was Grad Associates, was the architectural group, is available in several places, but I believe it's at the archives. They also have hundreds of photographs that were taken at the time. So all kinds of wonderful things for researchers that are coming to light as part of this Newark Archives project. So they're going to actually have a database that's online, and right now I also have, like, for those things that I think are especially of interest to people who are researchers, we're also incorporating some of that into the Newark experience. So, every time I go out there, there's something new and exciting to be found.
Could you tell me a little bit about the Newark History Society?
The Newark History Society is actually a very active group. They have been in existence, I believe, for I think we just celebrated their 10th anniversary, and they sponsor and have sponsored over the past 10 years a very large number of very interesting programs. So most of them have been held over at the New Jersey Historical Society, and they've had programs on everything from, they had a program, I believe it was in the spring, I lose track after a while, that had to do with Chinatown in Newark, because Newark used to have a very active Chinatown, and they brought in some former residents that grew up there, and it was actually a very exciting program. They've had programs dealing with let me see, they've had them on Lincoln on things like sports in Newark, just anything and everything. These are people who are just passionate about Newark and about the history of Newark, and bringing their passion to the people who are here right now. But they've done wonderful work. In fact, when they had the 10th anniversary, the sort of poster that they did had bits of posters that they'd done for other programs, and it was very, very well done. It was a wonderful program. But they're among the people who are leading this whole thing, this whole surge of interest in Newark history.
I noticed on the poster that you mentioned that one of the sub-posters was the program that they did about the 1910 Newark factory fire. Are you familiar with that at all, the commemoration?
Yeah, unfortunately I couldn't go to that program, but yeah.
Could you speak to me a little bit about it?
Could I speak a little bit about the program or about the fire?
About the fire.
I mean, I have read about the fire, and it was again one of these very tragic things where workers were basically expected to work under conditions that disaster was pretty much inevitable, and we know that it's certainly one of many fires that took place during that period in the early part of the 20th century. And I unfortunately cannot remember the details. I'm trying to think now. There's a very good article that dwells that brings out a lot of the historical sources for on that fire, but I can't remember at this point what the details were. Unfortunately, I did not make that program, which is supposed to be a wonderful program.
Do you think we could speak a little bit about the memory of Newark 67 and also the memory of Conklin Hall? I know here we we recognized the 40th anniversaries of both events. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that as to why it's important for us to remember these events today, what lessons they have for us about Newark and American cities as a whole. As loudly as you can.
Well, I mean, it's those who don't, what did Henry Ford say? Something about those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it. And that's certainly the case. How people remember it obviously varies very differently. Was it a riot? Was it a rebellion? What was it? And maybe that's the important thing, that we have to remember that our eyes aren't the eyes of the people there, and how we remember it we have to be careful about. But I think for current generations, looking back and looking what the conditions were, much of it is not believable. It's and it's something that they have to know about. They have to know about, because it's so much changed after that, and some of it for bad, some of it for good, but ultimately it's part of what formed this city, and you don't want to go back to the bad parts, but you don't want to get stuck in them either. You don't want to get stuck in them. But I think everybody has to understand what happened and why it happened, just to go forward, and just to make sure that those kinds of things don't ever have to happen again. And the Conklin Hall thing, I think, again, I think, for current students, again, the situation, I think, would be something that would just seem to be alien. I mean, that the fact that, black students had to fight for basically their experience to be something legitimate and studied and taken into account, and for them to be able to participate fully in the education here. I'm not sure that current students would even understand why they would have to do that. So again, just to know where we came from, I think it's very important. I mean, if you look at that, in the scheme of things, that wasn't that long ago. And now Rutgers Newark points to itself as the most diverse, institution in the nation. Could we have had that without Conklin Hall? Maybe eventually, but what they did made a difference. Made a difference. And having been on this campus for a long time, with students, there's kind of they go through these periods of great activism, and then we seem to go into these great periods of, I'm here, I just want to get out of here, and the most important thing for me to do when I get out of here is I need to major in something so I can get a good job. Sure, we want you to be able to do that, but I think the purpose of education is much more than I want to get a good job. It's also to kind of come to grips with who you are and what you stand for and what you're interested in, and in some cases you can make a difference. So and maybe it'll be here and maybe it'll be someplace else, but that's all part of your education. So I think that both have value, but I hope we continue to be an educational institution and not, a vocational school. Oh my goodness, what was it like when I first came here? Well, I came here actually in 1978, so I've been around a very long time. When I first came here, well, I don't know if it's an apocryphal story, but the story is that when this campus was built, we won the concrete award of the National Concrete Society, or whatever it was called at the time. There was no grass, there were no trees, there were no flowers. I think for many of us who've been here for a long time, somehow the day we knew that we were on a real college campus and that some kind of corner had been turned is when they put up the volleyball net in front of the dorm, and there were kids out there playing volleyball, and it was like, oh my God, what happened? This is the way it should be, but that was a big change. We were still in the, oh my God, you're going to Newark, what a dangerous city. Although I have never, the worst thing that's ever happened to me here is, someone once, well, actually I guess there were two. Someone once broke into my car and stole my bathing suit. Why? I have no idea. And I did have my car stolen from in front of University Police Headquarters once. And stripped down to its last wire. It was the week it would have crossed 200,000 miles. So apparently old Toyotas have value. But property crimes are property crimes, and they happen everywhere. I would say that one of the big differences, besides the fact that the campus is now not concrete. Well, we still have our share, but not the way it was. The campus has always been pretty much an oasis sort of thing. I used to walk here from the train station fairly regularly, and you really couldn't walk here without somebody coming up and asking you for money and stuff like that. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It used to be that, there would occasionally be, for example, restaurants and things that started up, but very rarely would they be able to survive, and that's not the case anymore. It used to be pretty much that if you wanted to, get real food in Newark, the Ironbound was pretty much your only place that you could go for that. There were certainly, there were a couple of mom and pop little, kind of delis around. we didn't have all those tall buildings. We didn't have the dorms. It was like, I think, a little bit more isolated in that sense. Um, so, that has changed, I think, very much. That has changed very much. It was certainly, Newark was not a destination city. It had for much of its history been a destination city. Um, probably, probably into the 50s. And then, into the 60s, and certainly after the riot rebellion, whatever we wish to call it, it became very much not a destination city. So having people now coming to Newark to eat, having people come to Newark to go to the Arts Center, to go to Prudential. I mean, this is all a very big turn for Newark, I think.
Why do you think it took Newark so long to commemorate Newark '67? Summer of discontent, insurrection, rebellion, riot, however we want to think about it. It seemed that even for the 40th anniversary, I know Clem Price and a lot of other people worked very hard to get the city on board, and initially the mayor was not really all that interested in doing it. Why do you think it took so long for Rutgers to recognize Conklin Hall and for Newark to recognize '67?
Okay, why did it take so long for them to recognize '67 and celebrate it, if you could? Well, first of all, it's hard to celebrate something that people call a riot. And I think that there's a lot of pain associated with that. And whether it's a riot or a rebellion, those are not happy words. And it doesn't seem to be something I think people want to celebrate and look back on. I think for the Newark municipal government, I think it was something they wanted to forget about and move past, because I think in a lot of ways, and I think in a lot of ways, it is something that held Newark back. That whole notion of Newark as a dangerous city, as a city where riots happen. I think that's very hard. If what you're trying to do is attract people to come to the city. Since we mentioned Brad Tuttle before, Brad Parks. Okay, good. I've remembered his name. Since you weren't there, Brad Parks, as part of this, he was a reporter for the Newark Star-Ledger, and he wrote a wonderful series on the 40th anniversary. And he also gave a talk here and one of the things that he did was to talk about primarily Newark, but also this whole notion of celebrating and remembering. And he actually looked at 10 years and 20 years and 30 years and 40 years for Newark and for Detroit. And after 40 years, Newark was ready to commemorate. Detroit never did. And that was one of the things that he was actually interested in, is this whole memory thing, and why people were ready and why they were not in different places. It was a fascinating talk. He, like so many of the Star-Ledger, is part of the Star-Ledger diaspora, and he actually is now writing award-winning mysteries. He just published his third one, that are actually set in Newark. He's an excellent writer, and I read mysteries exclusively pretty much, but it's kind of a shame that he's lost, because he also is an excellent reporter who really sees what some of the issues are. But I think that you have, at some point, it takes a long time before people are ready to look back and I don't know, maybe to look back and see it as something that happened, not necessarily something that reflects on them. I think, and it may not be the same for different places and different times. And maybe because maybe because at that point Newark was, the trajectory was up rather than down, that they were willing to ready to look back. And maybe before that, that just wasn't an option.
I feel similarly. I feel like, if we think about it, we had a whole generation go by before we could really look back at those old wounds. And at a time of 2007, it's really when there's a lot of rhetoric of the Newark Renaissance going around. And I wonder if maybe, even though the same amount of time had gone by in Detroit, maybe, I don't recall anybody talking about a Detroit Renaissance.
Yeah, Detroit's, from what I understand, is in much worse shape at this point. And they're, one of the things that for the 10th anniversary of the Newark History Society, they had this big event at the Newark Public Library, and the keynote speaker for that was actually Kenneth Jackson, who gave a wonderful talk on cities and what it takes for cities to come back, and which cities seem to be on the way back and which do not. And I think Detroit is still in a lot of trouble.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak to me a little bit about the exact year that you came to Newark, and maybe just what your first day in Newark was like.
Oh, my first day in Newark. Well, I'm not sure that I remember anything of terrible significance. Actually, my first day was the day I came for my interview here. And I had taken the train and the subway. We still called it the subway in those days. They had these turnstiles, but the full-length ones that you walk through, not just the little gates. And so at the subway, so I came through that, and the person behind me pushed too hard and broke the heel of my shoe off. So I came here for my interview, and they put me in a room, and my degrees are actually in art history, and for some reason they had all these prints that were sort of against the wall on the floor. So when the committee came in for my interview, I was on the floor wearing one shoe, pawing through these prints. And they hired me anyway. I'm not quite sure why. But that's my major memory. Not so much the city, but hobbling in for my interview, and Hogarth prints. They were Hogarth prints. I still don't know why we had them, but I had actually been the librarian at the Center for Urban Policy Research down in New Brunswick for 4 years before that. Center for Urban Policy Research actually started up here. It's now part of the Blaustein School. The whole notion of cities and the urban experience was something I was sort of familiar with, but that was my sort of introduction to the Dana Library in Newark at that point.
What was the year that you came to Newark?
I came to Newark in 1978, which was, I guess, 2 years after this wing had been built on, or maybe only a year, onto the library, which was the library was originally over on Rector Street in the old Ballantine Brewery. So this was the brand new wonderful building. The reference, I only know this because Gil Cohen, who was the head of public services when I came, had actually worked in the old library, and apparently the reference room was originally the malt room, and it had a sloped floor so that the liquid could drain off, and so they had kind of this slope to the whole reference room. But we were in the modern building now, so that was okay.
Having been in the audience for some of the commemorative activities for Newark 67 and 2007, could you tell me about the events that you attended, what they look like, what you learned from them, just kind of for somebody that didn't get an opportunity to go, what the day would have looked like, or the things that you saw?
what did I see? The events of the commemorative events. There were so many different ones. The Brad Parks talk that was part of the whole series that happened to be something that took part on this campus. There was a huge thing over at the public library that had original members of the Lilly Commission talking about how they were set up and how they worked, and the people they interviewed and what the results were, which was just a wonderful presentation. I'm trying to think what else. Of course, there was an exhibit over at the New Jersey Historical Society, and there were a couple of events that took place over there as well. Okay, I know I went to more than this. Oh, yes, there was over at the law school, and it was basically, well, was that part of that? Because there were other things as well. There was someone who came and talked about, who was part of the original commission, federal commission, that looked at, that investigated what had gone on here. And that was just an incredible presentation. I mean, from somebody who was actually part of it and knew how it had been set up. And the sad part of that was one of the few things that actually did not get videotaped or recorded in any way. And somebody had a phone they were holding up, in the hopes that they could get something. But it was a really wide-ranging series of events that went on. What Clem refers to as the Big Bad Committee did just this incredible job, as, Clem Price activities usually do. But they kind of had, something for everybody, the historians, and just enough that would be I think there were people that attended these that were academic historians. There were people who had participated in it. There were people whose families had been involved, and that was part of it, that somebody would stand up and say, well, I was at such and such a place, and this is what happened there then. And so that you had both what had already been documented and other people just standing up and adding to the picture of what went on. It was really a wonderful series of programs.
When you attended the commemorative activities that you did in 2007, what did the audience look like to you? If you just glanced out into the audience, what would you see?
If I glanced out into the audience, well, my goodness, again, pretty much everybody. I mean, you had people that had actually been there. So longtime Newark residents, or people who had been residents who have, moved out, whatever. You had children of people who had been part of it. You had academics. You had you had people who had been part of, who maybe they owned stores, maybe, they were people who were upper middle class. You had people who had been, at the bottom of the social scale at the time. You had students. And so you had people who, for whom much of this was just news, and people who had lived through it, and people who wrote about it, and people who studied it. It was an incredible range of people who were there, hearing all this.
Also really interested, my dissertation project is all about history and memory in Newark, and I'm trying to think through the differences in commemorative activities where you have eyewitnesses compared to those that you don't. So for example, for the 1910 factory fire, the 100th anniversary would not have any survivors or anybody that had been in Newark at the time compared to Conklin Hall and 67. And I wonder what that does. What do you think the presence of witnesses does for commemorative activities?
What does the presence of witnesses do for commemorative activities? You know, for the 1910 fire, obviously, yes, no one is alive. You do have published accounts. You do have, you do have the testimony of witnesses, that sort of thing. But there's a great difference in reading something and actually hearing someone talk about, I did this, I saw this, this happened to me. And there's a tremendous immediacy about that. So I think in terms of the effect on the other people there, that could be very different. All of it, of course, is tainted, I guess, because how people remember. Memory is not exact. It's built in your experiences. I think anybody who's ever argued with members of their family, that argument isn't that particular thing. It's built on a lifetime of arguing about X, Y, and Z, and what the real issue is, and all that sort of stuff. So memory is always tainted in some way. But in terms of the effect on other people, I think in making it vivid, to be able to have someone stand up and talk about their own experience. I also think there's some danger, I think, in saying that their experience is wrong if it doesn't match up with yours. Philip Roth's I think takes a lot of flack from people who say that he didn't write about real Newark. He wrote about, this piece of Newark, and that's not my piece of Newark. Well, yeah, but he wasn't trying to write about your piece of Newark. He was writing about the Newark he knew. It's different from the Newark you know. And which is why you're going to get people, who have lived through the same thing, stand up and talk about different kinds of things, and they theoretically went through the same thing, but the reaction to it, their memory of it, is not going to be the same because it's colored by their own circumstances.
I agree completely. So when we look at Newark Pastoral, it's going to be a different experience than perhaps Miri Bracca's experience.
That's right. Absolutely. And they're both valid, so there's no, you can't say, no, you're wrong. You're not wrong. It's just different. And, if you want the full picture, you have to put all of it together.
I was wondering if you had to share your takeaway from the commemoration of Newark 67, if you had to kind of impart some lessons that you learned to someone who did not get an opportunity to attend, what do you think would be your takeaway from the 40th anniversary commemoration?
Oh dear, my takeaway from the 40th anniversary commemoration. I'm not sure, because it is a cumulative experience. So you could say, I went to this program and from this I learned, and I never knew this way. And from this one I got this sense. But altogether, I guess one of the things is that we tend to look at events as this thing that happened. And because it was only 40 years, we still had people who were there to talk about it as personal events. And I think what we tend to lose at when we look at historical events is the effect on the immediate person and what it did. So I think maybe, it's not, this happened and the city was affected in this way, but this is what happened to this group of people and this group of people and this group of people. So that maybe it's a humanization of an event, as opposed to just sort of, just the facts. On this date, this happened, and on this date, this happened. Everything that happened had a profound effect, not just on the city of Newark, but on the people of the city of Newark. And maybe that's what you take away from a 40th anniversary.
Thank you. Is there anything that you would like to include that I have not asked you?
No, I can't think of anything. I'm late tonight, but that won't help.
I can come back.
Okay.
Would it be okay for me to follow up with you as this project goes on?
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.